I'm going to wait till, all right, now it looks like the participant loading has slowed down. So I think we can go ahead and get started with the introductions. All right, well, hi everyone. Welcome to today's SPLC webinar. It's on making the case for investment in your company's sustainable purchasing program. My name's Helena Tavares-Kennedy. I'm a program consultant to the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. You'll see today's agenda. We'll start with a few announcements and introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentations. If you do have to drop off early, just be aware that this is being recorded. It's a 1-hour webinar, so we should be ending 2 o'clock Eastern time. We will allow all registrants to be able to access the recording of the webinar and a PDF of the slides. So that is available for all of you. We'll have time at the end for some Q&A. So don't feel like you have to hold your questions till the end, though. You can go ahead and type them in your Q&A box throughout the webinar, and Sarah will be kind of keeping an eye on those, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end. We encourage you to check out the SPLC activities calendar online. Here's the URL, but if you just go to sustainablepurchasing.org, you'll see the activities calendar on there. We'll be having a webinar coming up in September. We haven't nailed down the date with the speakers yet, but that should be announced soon. So just keep an eye out on that website.
And the focus is on renewable energy purchasing strategies.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Yep. So that'll be a really good one too. So for today, we've got Sarah O'Brien. Sarah's SPLC's Director of Programs. She's also the acting CEO. She's responsible for ensuring that SPLC's many programs empower procurement and sustainability professionals around the globe to implement high-impact sustainable purchasing practices. So we'll also hear from Judy. She's the Senior Director of Sustainability and Supply Management. That's a good title, Judy. She is at Sodexo and is responsible for all of their sustainability and corporate responsibility in the supply chain. She works to incorporate internal and client goals for sustainability and corporate responsibility into their local sourcing, their sustainable products, responsible supply chain practices, sustainability innovation. So she's got lots of great examples on today's topic to share with us. We also have David McClintock, the Marketing Director for EcoVadis. Hi, David. His business is focused on sustainability ratings and actionable scorecards, which he'll talk a little bit about today as well, which provides insights into environmental, social, and ethical practices in supply chains across 190 purchasing categories and 150 countries. So we are going to get started with Sarah first. So Sarah, I am going to go ahead and give you control of the slides so we can hear all about the white paper and the background on SPLC and what we're doing today.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Let me make sure I'm clicking through here.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. The SPLC, the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, was stood up 6 years ago because of the incredible opportunity that we have as professionally managed stewards of professionally managed purchasing across many organizations, countries, sectors, etc. We estimate about a $10 trillion spend opportunity. The opportunity to put that spend toward more positive solutions in the economic, social, and environmental sphere. So we have incredible power in leveraging that spend across the world, but we also often find that requirements and requests and policies that different sectors, different organizations, different individuals push up their supply chain are divergent. And so even though everybody's trying to purchase more sustainable products and services, they end up confusing their suppliers often and fragmenting the market rather than aggregating demand to clearly drive markets toward preferable solutions. So the solution, as we see it, is to bring purchasers together with suppliers, with NGOs, and others who are pursuing these sustainability aims to really consolidate and leverage our power to change the marketplace. So the SPLC's mission is to define, develop, support, and recognize leadership in sustainable purchasing. We do that through a number of programs. I won't read through the list here, but chief among them are some of the exciting new developments over the past year. We're doing one-to-one strategic program development coaching with our organization members. We're working with peer-to-peer support and co-creation of needed resources and references, and really trying to help our participants meaningfully connect with each other and meaningfully connect their purchasing initiatives to really make that change in the marketplace that we want to see. One of our things that I should call out is our annual summit, which brings together over 500 practitioners, purchasers, suppliers, NGOs, and more across all categories to learn from each other, to share, and to be recognized through our awards program. So we invite you to join us next year, May 18th through 20th in Atlanta, Georgia, and to also join us throughout the year for webinars like this one, where we delve into critical sustainable purchasing topics. I want to thank EcoVadis, the organization that Dave represents, for their sponsorship of the research behind this webinar and this webinar itself. We are very grateful to them for allowing us to really build resources that are meaningful, practical, and actionable for our members, like the white paper that we're discussing today. So, SPLC is always focused on the notion that there's a maturity curve to sustainable purchasing, and our members fall at all stages along this curve. Some are just coming into the process at this very initial stage, initiating activities, often fairly ad hoc, often with a very minimal staffing, if anything, sometimes part of one person's time, even in a very large organization. Over time, and I've used the example here of goals and metrics, over time, as programs develop, they become more consolidated around, in this example, specific metrics reporting, actually doing data collection rather than just kind of making ad hoc stabs at getting some information to act on. As they move up the maturity curve, an organization would say, okay, well, now we want to establish quantitative goals and a baseline. We understand we've gathered enough data. We're now going to set our baseline, set some goals that are very quantitatively related to what we found in obtaining our first data collection and reporting. And finally, at the leading level, an organization would publish quantitative goals and commitments to the public at large, and ensure that they have systems in place to attain those goals. Another way of looking at this maturity path, just recently we were talking on a webinar about growing internal stakeholder engagement. So again, at that initiating level, you may just have some volunteers who are excited about sustainable purchasing, perhaps in your purchasing team, and want to take some of this on. As you start to formalize, you begin to assign tasks, if you're lucky, to multiple people to help you move forward and engage in these issues. As you scale up, you assign specific responsibilities to a larger team. And finally, at the level of leadership, this becomes a piece of evaluation for all purchasing roles, for example. So when we look at this maturity path, we understand that wherever you are along the path, you could usefully obtain and leverage additional resources, right? You need a number of resources. Some of the most common are staffing. You definitely need to bulk up your team if you're in a large organization to address all the issues that you might. You need impact assessment. One of SPLC's basic principles is to support people in assessing their impact and making the most highest priority initiatives addressing their highest impact purchasing categories. You may need third-party help in doing that, or a staff member devoted to that analysis and assessment. You might need supplier assessment, and whether that's internal, again, tasking a staffer, or third-party service provider provided. You need resources to support that kind of transparency and reach into your supply base to understand where you might need to make interventions. And finally, there's research support for individual categories as you move forward, understanding the solutions that are out there and so forth. And consulting and membership where you can really keep in tune with best practices, new initiatives, innovations in different spaces. We, of course, encourage you to put SPLC membership on that list as part of your research and information base. So when people are looking to get these kinds of investments, they often approach this in a very methodical way. And we see people putting a lot of time and effort into things like tracking each RFP that mentions a sustainability characteristic or attribute, pointing to specific commodities or sectoral areas of high concern and pointing out what the downside might be for your organization with involvement in that, where you have exposure in that area, or pointing to specific areas or specific contracts where sustainable purchasing can help save money. All of these involve a significant expenditure of time and effort because they're quite precise, because they're quite data-based. And so they actually add to your burden before they ease your burden. So we wanted to find a better way. We wanted to ask our members, some of our members who have been most successful at making the case for serious investment of staffing, resources, third-party services for their programs. How did you actually succeed in making the case? How were you really able to do it? Was it this kind of very granular detail that you provided as an argument, or was it a larger argument that you were making that tied this all together and convinced your leadership to invest? So we spoke to this wonderful crew, all really leaders in this space for their various companies and organizations. And today, Judy Paneas is going to join us and speak from her perspective over a long period of time, really developing a program. And I think Judy has noted that she's used all of the strategies that these folks suggested to us. What we found in a nutshell was that people were very aligned in terms of saying, make big arguments, make sweeping arguments that point to business value, competition, very elements that are very much integral to your company's operations and success, rather than trying to go to this very small granular level. And so we'll walk through these, and Judy and I are going to try a little tag teaming on this. I'm going to speak to the theme that was raised by our participants, and Judy is going to give us an example from her experience. So first of all, this is perhaps too obvious to mention, but talk about customer revenue. If you know that customers are asking about sustainability attributes of your products or services or your operations as a company, talk about that when you're talking to your superiors and asking them for investment, and talk about it writ large. Don't worry about that one RFP or 10 RFPs. Assume that if someone has one RFP with you that integrates sustainability criteria, pretty soon all of their business will integrate that same kind of request, and assume that that large scale is where you're going in terms of building your sustainability characteristics. So Judy.
Yes, absolutely. So I did this at my previous company when I managed the supplier diversity program, and it was RFP after RFP. And then there were customers who were coming to us that were existing customers who wanted reporting. It was very easy to track the revenue against those inquiries, just keeping a list of customers throughout the year. And then as the same at Sodexo, right? We track that on the supplier diversity side, but also on the sustainability side. And I work with my counterpart who runs supplier diversity, Darlene Fuller, and where many times she'll get questions that she can answer. We also have a bunch of information out there that the sales teams can refer to. So we don't even know all of the questions that are coming in because we've made some self-serve things for our sales teams and whatnot. So we track every single dollar that we can find, we know about, and then we say this is underestimated, right? Because we have made it a case out there that our operations folks, that our sales folks, that the VPs in the different business segments all have enough information at their fingertips to be able to talk about what we do. So even though we're collecting data on these RFPs and customer inquiries, if it wasn't specific enough that they needed to pull us in at the corporate level, we're absolutely kind of under-reporting what's in this customer revenue. And being able to track that by subject, by segment, trends around what things customers are asking about in a particular segment is also very important.
Great. And I assume that it took you some investment to get the message out and get materials out to all of those sales folks and VPs and so forth as well.
Yes. Yeah. And the good thing is a lot of times the businesses will ask for that. It's like, what can you give me? What can you give me? How can you give me information quicker? And that's, and so the case is almost made for you when the businesses are coming to you for better service.
That's great. So the second one, I think, Judy, you said you did not have a great tale. So I'm going to borrow a tale from one of our board members, Tim Hopper from Microsoft. One of Tim's main points in terms of their sustainable purchasing program is that they have investors coming to them all the time, asking about environmental, social, and governance factors, asking them about their sustainability goals, their sustainability achievements. And Tim runs Microsoft's indirect purchasing, which is not their direct supply chain for hardware and software, but their purchasing of every other thing to run their operations. But what he can point to is the credibility and solidity of their sustainable purchasing program contributes significantly to Microsoft's operational sustainability initiatives. So what he does is add up all those investors who have ESG conditions in their investing, or who send questionnaires, or, as you say, Judy, call meetings, and points to those investors as potentially lost investors if Microsoft can't demonstrate on all fronts their commitment to sustainability, and then points to his sustainable procurement program as a major contributor to Microsoft's good positioning on the issues people are concerned with.
Yeah, what I love about his story is that he's interacting directly with investors. Who knew procurement people would do that?
Yeah.
Right. And for me in the past, it's been, okay, my investing group might come to me with a question. Hey, we got this question. How do we address it? But I haven't had as much direct involvement with investors as Tim has. And I find myself lucky at Sodexo, because even though we have public stock out there, we're controlled still by the founding family, who is very much dedicated to social license to operate and all CSR issues. So I'm lucky in that sense, is that we don't feel the same kind of investor pressure at Sodexo as many companies might.
Interesting. Yeah. So talk about the competition. Nothing gets a boss a little more charged up than thinking, wait a minute, our competitors are doing this. They're ahead of us in this. They've invested in this substantially, and we have not. So as much as you can, whether it's informally at an event like the SPLC Summit, talk with your colleagues at other companies who you might consider competitors, even adversaries, find out what they're doing. This kind of benchmarking can often really usefully light a fire under some folks to offer some resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think benchmarking is huge. I mean, when you're in a supply organization, a lot of the times what we do is market analysis, right? So we provide that when we're out in the market trying to sell, this is what we're up against. And if we can't provide the same thing, it's an advantage to our competitor. So it's a matter of, we have to make sure that we're at least providing everything that's available, but also, particularly at Sodexo, we want to be better in this sustainability space, because it is core to who we are. And so if we can't demonstrate that by the tools, by the data, by how we work with our customers, then we're missing that mark. And so much of almost everything we buy actually is for our customers. So in my role in the procurement organization, that argument around what competitors are doing, where their sustainable purchasing sits in their organization, how it's resourced, what tools they're using. Like, that's all very good information to help us have a better program and at least be on par with anything that our customers could ask for, and hoping that we can also pull ahead.
It's the name of the game, right? This was an interesting one. Folks said, talk about return on supplier engagement. Sorry, there we go. This one is a complex one, but my understanding of the thread that carried through everybody's argument, despite being in very disparate industries, was focus on how engaging suppliers, establishing reporting and communication with suppliers, doing capability building with suppliers actually saves money, reduces risk, and enables you to sell better in the long run. And that these investments that you're making in your supplier base or supply chain are critical to your confidence and awareness that you are where you need to be vis-a-vis your supply chain, and you're not going to have surprises or sudden unexpected risks pop up out of nowhere. But Judy, right. I'm sure you have a.
And I would say in the aspect of your impact on the community, having a positive impact on community, engaging with your suppliers, capacity building, anything that you're doing in that respect, particularly working with small and diverse businesses, local businesses, is something that's important to our clients. Again, tied back to the strategy of the company. I feel like almost every single one of these has to be tied back to the strategy of the company, right? Otherwise, people won't listen to you. But this is where, as a kind of a large company that can be seen as, big as bad, that you can really demonstrate that you're having a positive effect through this engagement with your suppliers. You're working to make positive change in your supply base through your influence as a big purchaser. And also, that community engagement piece, and you're part of the community and you're benefiting the community where you're doing business. So for us, that's that value on this return on supplier engagement. So it can be tracked through economic infusion into the community. It can be tracked on through our work with our suppliers. We've got reusable packaging instead of cardboard boxes or plastic that's thrown into the landfill. Like, you can start telling these stories together with your suppliers that will help you as a company. And that's how you're going to convince somebody to invest in it, is that on the other side, you're going to help with revenue. You're going to help with making things more efficient. in your supply chain. And so this kind of work is actually very good to do in your supply base and should be resourced.
Mm-hmm. And Judy, what I hear you saying too is that tracking these stories, understanding these impacts is something that you can then team up with marketing or sales or, to really genuinely tell real stories of how you've engaged in and improved a community, even if the exact ROI of that effort is not immediately measurable, right? It's
Correct.
as you say,
Correct.
That
like with local sourcing, you can track your percentage of local sourcing, but really, if you're purchasing huge amounts of things, that little percentage might seem small, but if you put it in the right place and you can show the positive impact, that kind of demonstration of your return on your supplier engagements is much more profound, particularly in that market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great point.
Risk and reputation, my favorite.
There we go. Yes, and it's a little slow on my
forward.
end, so I keep shooting forward. Sorry. There we go. Back one more. Risk and reputation. Yeah, well, I think this one is fairly obvious, particularly in terms of direct sourcing. So direct supply chain, risk and reputation obviously is top of mind for the C-suite. I think that's kind of enough said. I think this may be one of the more ones that people think of immediately.
Right.
But Judy, do you want to talk about this in terms of how it fits in that, constellation of other arguments and other
Sure. And this can be a hard one to sell, right? Because when you're talking about risk, it's about something might happen, right? When you're talking about reputation, this might affect all of our business, right? So you have to really talk like a risk professional when you're doing this and think about what's the likelihood and what's the impact. So the likelihood of this particular thing happening, that what you're asking for resources is going to help solve, and what's that possible impact, right? So there's that side of it on building a program and getting resources to prevent something, right? So it's going to cost money, but it's that argument about that prevention that's important. And if you can find an example in your industry where something happened in this space, that's the most profound, because then you can tie that back to revenue lost. Hopefully it's not your company, it's someone else's company that happened to. So having that, I can't curse on this, can I? The OS, that happens in your company usually gets a great investment. You don't want that to happen, right? So you have to convince people that you want to avoid that OS, right? And then the other side of it is compliance, right? So there are things either from a regulation standpoint or from your customer base that are being required. And there's a trend to more and more of kind of similar things. So you can also make this efficiency argument. We have to invest in setting this up properly with the right resources now, whether it's a tool, a consultant, a person, so that when the rubber hits the road and this trend hits you absolutely must do it right now, we're not scrambling and just throwing money at it to solve it. It's better to set it up ahead of time. So I think that in this space, those are very important things to think about.
Yeah, and I like that focus on preventing rather than just addressing risk, because all too often, as we know, addressing risk causes people to throw resources at one area where there was a problem and potentially take them away from other areas where the problems are simply not uncovered yet. So as much as possible, taking that preventive approach to try and not just jump on, for example, the chemical of the day or, the issue of the day, but to have a comprehensive program.
Right.
And then I think, Judy, you were saying earlier, and I totally agree, make sure you're aligned with corporate strategy. One of the first things we do when we're helping people develop strategic sustainable purchasing programs is say, well, let's inventory all of your company's policy statements and commitments and CSR goals and measurement so that you make sure that the data that you're reporting is consistent with what they need to, show evidence toward attaining strategic goals and so forth. Make sure that you understand your company's values, priorities, as you've been mentioning, Judy, with Sodexo. There's a very clear set of values that you understand guide the company, and therefore you're aligning with those.
Right.
So
I think this is where a materiality matrix can really help. So companies that have done a materiality matrix, which is a study not just internally about what's important to us as a company, but what's important to all of our stakeholders in the ESG space, and really being able to focus on the solutions around advancing those is the best way to align to your corporate strategy in this space. If you don't have that, oh gosh, somebody's asking me what OS stands for.
Yeah,
it's
it was bleep. Just a euphemism for a bad word. Oh, bleep.
Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, bleep. So anyway, so back to corporate strategy. So I think it's important to understand what your company is trying to do and how sustainable purchasing is going to advance that. And so everything has to be tied back to that. Otherwise, it's not. You're not going to get the support. So that I think this is a thread that could go through every single one of these. That you make the argument specifically around what this is, but it always has to go back to that corporate strategy.
Right. Talking about cost savings, this was one we mentioned earlier, and I think it's very useful, but often gets very granular, and people are like, well, on this contract, there's a potential, and they spend a lot of time calculating. I think that, and Judy, I'd love to hear you speak to this, because I think it needs to be a bigger argument. It needs to be an argument about prevention and so forth, which is sometimes a challenging argument to make when you're preventing something that has not yet happened. But I do think, or when you're saving costs, which may be incurred or may not be, but that's part of business evaluation, right? So cost savings are big.
In my previous life, we talked about cost avoidance, right? And so that's one way to quantify. So there's cost savings, which is going to really hit the P&L. But sometimes it's cost avoidance. Like, if we don't do this, this will happen. A good example is we had a supplier that came to us with my previous life, came to us with a price increase. And we said, why? Right? Which is good, instead of absolutely not. Said, why? Why do you feel like you need this price increase? And they said, well, this is just the cost of what we're doing. So we said, well, let's see if we can help you. So we sent engineers to their plant, and they accepted us to do this. And they did a study and found a huge amount of improvements in the energy saving and efficiency. And so there was this big sustainability element that also was cost savings. And then we could share that, right? So as you look at creating continuous improvement programs and sustainability with your suppliers, you can also build into that the fact that there may be shared savings here. There may be ways to avoid increases or even decrease the cost, because particularly if you're buying goods, right? Lean is green, right? You can save money, green, but also be avoiding waste, right? So there are instances where it's very specific that you can talk about the continuous improvement work with suppliers, but also on that side of, we're going to have to do this kind of work anyway. If we invest now in a tool, in a person, in a process, then we will be able to save money going forward. Like I said, rather than at the end when we get to that point of it's required, scrambling and ending up throwing money at things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our final advice from our experts was, take it in small steps. you're very unlikely to win the case if you go in and say, I need you to give me, 5 extra staff plus third-party supplier ratings plus an investment and impact analysis plus my SPLC membership plus consulting. That's unlikely to win. And this is one of the things we do again when looking at strategic program planning is try and say, okay, well, what's needed right now? What's needed in future? Kind of plot those things out over time and anticipate that you are going to argue for every one of them, but really sequence them in a way that you can, at each stage, point to savings, improvements, greater scope, etc.
Right. Especially at the beginning as you're building a program or a new part of a program, I think it's very important to have a small ask that you can put a fence around, that you can demonstrate success in a relatively short period of time and show the value of that investment, because that builds trust, that builds organizational trust in a way that will make it much easier to go for the next thing, right? And so I would, we've definitely done that in a few instances. Certainly in my career, is say, I will, or I'll ask for something and they'll be like, no, that's too big. And I'll say, well, how about this? So, you have to go in as a procurement person and you have to ask for some, you have a position, but you also have to say, okay, if they don't go for that, what are some things that I could give up to get to something that then I can show success around? So, don't pick something that is iffy for success. Pick something that you're almost positive can have success, so that you can, again, build that trust and move forward with whatever the next thing is.
And those are the arguments that we heard and that we packaged up in the white paper. There's much more great stories, great discussion, so that we hope that you will download the white paper if you haven't already. And now we're going to turn it over to Dave McClintock to talk a little bit about how people leverage, what people invest in, what are the points of intervention as you gain resources. Thank you much, Judy, for great detail.
Thank you for really, Sarah and Judy, for that illustrating what's in the guide. It's really an incredible guide, but I think it's very helpful to hear the dialogue that goes along with it. So that was super. And then, for those of you in the audience, when you're looking at building these strategies, I'm sure it kind of begs the question a little bit like, okay, so what sorts of program elements do we need to invest in? So that's what I was going to just spend a little bit of time going through, in particular, the part around supplier sustainability assessment, which is what EcoVadis does. So that's what I was going to spend a little bit of time to give you kind of a picture of that. So first of all, our team here at EcoVadis, starting back in 2007, have helped hundreds of large and small multinational organizations to launch supplier sustainability, supply chain sustainability programs, and many of them we help them build their business case, and these arguments all come up, and they're it's really useful to know so what the range is, and I'm kind of looking at the whole scope. So don't get intimidated if some of these elements look like they might be for more mature companies, because in fact that might be what they are, but you can take the small steps to get there. So the three basic elements are, of course, you're going to have to look at processes, people, and then tools and technology. So I think first looking at the sort of spectrum of the types of things that you can invest in. You may not start with this full spectrum of activity, the way Judy said. You might want to start small, but beware of the scope of it eventually, because how these elements can work together to create more efficiency is really important. So along the left side of the screen, you can see the different types of elements that you might be considering that are part of your approach: environment, labor and human rights, ethics, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, that sort of thing, and then sustainable procurement itself. So what are your suppliers doing to ensure that their supply chain further upstream is secure? And then across there, you want to look at, for example, risk mapping and analysis is one example of something that can inform a later stage in the process where you might, every dollar that you spend in assessing suppliers is much more efficiently spent if you have that risk map first done. So those different types of tools. And then similarly on your assessment journey, if you're able to use a tool like a rating, where you get an actual quantitative feedback, you can determine which which suppliers are most at risk, and you might want to go and do an audit, which ones aren't moving and making any improvements. So this is sort of the broad scope of things that you could make investments in terms of approach. The other dimension to this that I wanted to point out is looking at it from a procurement perspective. There are many different elements and points in the process where sustainability can be taken into account. And this is a conversation that if you're in procurement, that you're having with your peers, or if you're in more of a sustainability or sustainable procurement role, you'll be having to find, where do you have the tools in place already, where you can integrate that, where do you have the right strengths, or where do you want to start? And it could range anything from when you're onboarding a new supplier, maybe you make it as a prerequisite that they provide some of that sustainability information or get a rating. Similarly, with the tendering process, RFP, RFX, requests for proposals, we've seen customers integrate sustainability ratings and criteria into those processes, either as a requirement to participate or as part of the selection criteria, a weighted factor. And then, as you can see, it goes along the line all the way up to, for example, a supplier relationship management system, weighting things in that sort of master scorecard is another way to integrate it. So all these different elements are things that you have to bear in mind if you're going to invest in a system. One last point about the procurement integration part is that, it is extremely helpful if you can get, the software piece all to work together, so that if you can get those sustainability indicators and data into the system where the purchaser is making the decision, you'll have a much easier time getting them to adopt and really, embed it into their daily processes, into their procurement decisions. So that's another element to the investment that may not be large, but something that you need to think about, maybe further downstream, more in the more mature phase of the program. After maybe 2 years or 3 years, we see customers turning to this sort of strategy to invest in. And it really, at least in our case with EcoVadis, we provide an API. We have integrations already with the major procurement softwares, so it's not a heavy lift, but it's something you need to be aware of. Okay, so I thought I'd come up with just one example to kind of bring it back home. And this one is from Clariant, who in fact were one of the participants in the study that you just heard about. And they have a fairly mature program now, having started it in 2015. Their investments spanned all of the pillars that we've just discussed. They've allocated staff and resources. They had a dedicated program role, as well as part-time from the different stakeholders within procurement, within compliance, participating in the program. So they made those deliberate investments. They also invested in tools. And in that particular case, they were a member of an industry initiative called Together for Sustainability. You can see the logo there. And they use the EcoVadis system to evaluate suppliers. So they were able to do their own screening. They used our standardized ratings and benchmarks. They also have a standard audit protocol. So participating in that was one of their key investments. And they really got out of it huge amount of leverage. Just a side note on how that works. Since they're participating with their other chemical industry colleagues, 22 of them, they have this shared pool of suppliers who, as they begin to take assessments and perform better and better, that pool of suppliers is visible to all of the members of the consortium there, Together for Sustainability. This creates more value for the supplier, so they're more engaged. So when you think about the investments you're making, another factor to consider is whether it's creating some value for the supplier, because that will really determine how much engagement you get from them. And of course, they had to contribute or invest in capability building, trainings, webinars, buyer and supplier targets, integrating them into, the annual reviews. And also another key investment in communications. And it started with internal communications. They really developed some very good tools to sort of socialize this program among all the stakeholders in the company. Then when they pivoted to go and start realizing some of the return and then learning about that, on the right-hand side, you'll see that, of course, risk mitigation was a big factor. And this is, I mentioned a case example about child labor in the mica extraction industry. It's a big focus point. That one is actually, if you want to put the numbers on it, I think number 2, talk about your investors. Number 5, I think was also another one from the study, how they got their return here. This is all summarized also in a webinar recording that has a link here that you'll receive after the presentation. But another interesting thing they did to get return out of their program was they created their own eco label around their products and their chemical companies. So when they sell a product to a customer, there's a licensing offer that says, if you want, you can put this label on your product, and it contains within it all of the things that they've done for sustainability, include all of the sustainable sourcing they did behind the creation of that product. So they're really trying to differentiate themselves in the market by the work that they've done in creating a sustainable supply chain. Of course, you have the capital markets. One big driver for them is they really wanted to be highly ranked on the DJSI, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which they are, and they really were quite happy with that success. And then, most importantly, I think this is from the number one item, the first item in the study, business development. They used it in their responses to RFPs to customers to respond to a specific request for multi-tier transparency. So they'd had these scorecards. They were being asked about their own supply chain, and they were able to respond to that customer, who's now a very long-term customer of theirs, with that. So they were able to realize very real and very tangible returns. So I encourage you will receive the presentation, like I said, and the recording to this webinar. There is also more information that will be included with that if you want to go further and look at all the details. I would say, simply our goal at EcoVadis is to help empower organizations and their value chain partners with the right tools to understand sustainability performance together so that they can use it in their commercial engagements and to build mutual value. And that's really what we're trying to do. So I would encourage everybody to use the great resources at SPLC. They have an incredible trove there where you can, in addition to the guidance, they also have a benchmarking program. I encourage you to get in their coaching program is wonderful. And also they've done reviews of tools. So you can go and see, EcoVadis compared to other sustainability rating tools. And that's really essential. That will help accelerate your development of your business case. So really, with that, I'll hand it back to Sarah and Helena, who can parcel out the questions for us. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, David. All right. I'm going to take back control here so we can share every of the speakers' emails here. In case we don't get to your questions today, I want to make sure that all of the participants today have the emails for our 3 speakers so that if you have any questions directly to them, you can reach out to them. They've kindly offered this up as kind of an extra bonus for all the participants to be able to get in touch with them. So, Sarah, do you want to get started with some of the questions? Looks like we did get a couple of questions in through the Q&A.
Yeah, we got a couple of great questions. One, I'll just answer quickly. Are SPLC's services available outside the U.S.? Yes. We have international members. In fact, one of our award winners this year was from Dubai. So we do serve folks all around the world and would love to talk to you. So a more program-focused question. According to your experience, how much time should a company plan to reach a high level of maturity along the maturity path? And my immediate response would be, gosh, really depends on the company. And your subject matter, your competitors. There's so much of an ecosystem around this. But if Judy or Dave, you have a sort of rule of thumb, feel free to respond.
I don't think there's a way to do a rule of thumb. But I will say that there can be pieces of your program that advance very quickly, where you have a particular commodity. Which, so you could have a really advanced program around your highest risk commodities. right?
Very quickly.
Versus, a program for everything to do. So there's, I think it really depends on what's your strategy, what's most material to you and to your own supply chain.
Yeah. And I think it also may depend on your circumstance, because if you're a company, like you have the oh crap moment, like for example, GSK did a few years back. It was a corruption issue in a supply chain, and so they were really pressed to do something. They tried their own internal programs, but in our case, when they decided to do it, they went from 0 to 1,500 suppliers assessed within 18 months, and they really invested a lot of resources to do that. But once they had that base, then they were able to build on it. It was well socialized within the company, so they kind of hit it with all guns blazing at the beginning and really ramped up quickly. Other companies, are in their 5th or 6th year, and they're at 70 or 75% of spend covered, which is fantastic. I mean, it's much harder than it sounds. But and they have very mature programs, and they've had just steady progress, steady pace of progress. So very different examples. Like I said, it depends on, maybe you're in a circumstance where you need to act now. You may be going a lot faster.
Right. And one last thing I'd mention too is that we often find when we're working with companies that there are various elements of a sustainable procurement program which are very mature. As you say, folks may have hit their highest risk areas first, really built up there, and then they're building slowly over time. So some other areas are far less developed. And that's to be expected. It's also to be expected based on the cyclical nature of purchasing, is that certain categories will open, certain initiatives and strategic sourcing initiatives will be addressed at different times. So you can't necessarily revise your entire portfolio in a flash. It does sequence over time. So there's a question about specific examples of return on supplier engagement, asking particularly for economic return on supplier engagement. And I think, Judy, you spoke very eloquently to that. Maybe you have some added.
Sure. Yeah, we actually engaged a consultant to do an economic impact study by region. Around our engagement with small and diverse businesses. And so, and that to us was really important, because that, as a service organization who's coming in to serve a community, to be able to say, this is how we're a part of your community and this is what we do is important. And that can be the amount of money spent, the amount of jobs created, so there's different aspects that you can measure that are going to be tied to what is your business strategy, right? What is it you need to know? What is it you want to demonstrate regarding who you are as a company and what that might mean to your customer and client base?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, Dave, you might speak to the aspect of, for suppliers, being in a system often, if they're engaged with EcoVadis or another assessment system, it often simplifies for suppliers their need to provide information out to multiple customers. So that engagement on the part of one company might actually help that supplier over time to respond to multiple companies.
Right. So exactly. So the return on engagement, you can't be too selfish when you look at that equation, because they're a stakeholder in it as well. The supplier does the work to respond to your survey, to provide the information. If the output of that is something that gives them value, like for example a scorecard or some kind of information they can use to improve their practices, then really compliance is going to be easy next year, because you're doing better than you were last year. So the more you engage, the more rich the base list for that engagement. I think the more there's in it for the supplier, and when they got a little skin in the game and they're getting some value back out of it, they can share those results with all of their other customers, for example. Then they may be willing to make investments in improvements that are going to persist over the years, right? And so you're not constantly going back and finding the suppliers that are yo-yoing in and out of compliance above and below the line. They're actually building something into their business that'll be more permanent. So I think, how do you measure that financially? I think it would be difficult to do a broader study of that, but that would be an excellent one. Maybe that's my job. I'm supposed to be producing the content for us. That would be an excellent study next to see the collective value created for everybody across a network like that. So
yeah, how do you measure that multiplier effect, right? And that's, I mean, I've done that in kind of smaller engagements. I think I have a case study on there about what we did in Chicago around local sourcing, and how many people were trained, how many entrepreneurs, how our local purchasing had an impact on a community development program that was part of the supplier and the client at the same time, that we were working with. So you can do kind of those smaller measures, but it would be nice to figure out a way to measure that multiplier effect when we engage in the supply base, when we have an impact. It's not just us that affects. It goes out from there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to measure that. Can you get on that, David?
I'll be right on that.
Quick.
Maybe we'll work with SPLC on that.
Yeah. Let's see. We had another one here. Asking about Clariant creating their own eco label, and the question is, sort of what's your sense of that in terms of, the potential for it being seen as greenwashing, the potential for it to conflict with other existing eco labels, and so forth. Sort of, some thoughts on that.
I realize, be honest, I don't know that much about it, other than to say it's very specific to their business, and it's specific even to a narrow set of clients that they have. And so I don't think, it's not a consumer product. It's not a broad initiative. It's something that, you would use in, certain chemical applications that they're selling into, a specific, application. But what's behind it, yes, I think it's true of all labels. Everything has the potential to be dismissed as greenwashing. However, they're really trying to build that based on their sustainable procurement program rather than what they've done internally. So,
and I think that was what I was going to say. Having worked in an eco label setting for a long time, it's the what's behind the label that's really critical. So if you can say to a client or a customer, we have this label because it makes it easy to identify those products in our catalog that are compliant, but here are the mechanics behind it. Here's the reporting we've got. Here's the data that we collect. Here's how we've traced that. That's the meaningful package, right? It's sort of the eco label is just the start of that conversation or that sourcing discussion with the customer.
Yep.
But it's a nice way to sum it up and kind of allow them to identify some things they want to talk to you about, right? Judy, did you have a thought on that one?
There's so many labels out there, and I think it's important to understand what is it you're trying to convey, and is there something that's already out there that's benchmarked to be a label that has the benchmark behind it. Depending on the commodity, there's different benchmarking programs out there. Overall, ICL has a list of what makes a good eco label. So I think it's interesting to think of a branded sustainability label, and we purchase against some of those branded sustainability labels and count them in our metrics because they're meaningful, and we've had that conversation to go deep into it. But it's you have to, I think, understand that and understand the space you're in to see if that's really going to be useful or not for your company, or whether it's better to get a third-party certification that's benchmarked, because then there's trust behind it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we are just at the end of our time, so I want to turn it back over to Helena to carry us out.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. As David, Sarah, and Judy had mentioned, you all will get a link to the recording of this webinar as well as a PDF of the slides. So definitely take advantage of that so that you can review anything that you may have missed. And again, here's the emails for our speakers. So if we didn't get to your questions, I know there's quite a few in here that we haven't gotten to. So definitely reach out to our speakers if you are looking for some more guidance. Thank you so much, Sarah, Judy, David. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And really appreciate having the three of you on here to share your knowledge. I think it's
Can I make one more plug?
Yes.
For members, if you go in the member forum and you ask a question that you might want to ask me, you might get a whole lot more information than just what's in this head.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
We
Yeah.
do have a community forum for members, so you'll get a lot of responses.
Yep. Yeah. I definitely encourage members to use that. That's great. Thank you, Judy. All right. Great. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.